Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Daniel, and today in this video we'll be covering my final round game in the Horse and Buggy Tournament, which I played last weekend. At this point I am 1 for 5 out of 4 at this point, but the past 2 rounds I went up against one 2200 and one perennial or like former FIDE Master 2200 and also FIDE Master. So now I'm 1.5 for 4. And in this round, I'm playing a almost 2100 rated player, 2083 to be exact. I'm playing the black pieces, and let's see what I can do. So my opponent opens with e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, f4. Going for the Grand Prix attack, d6, knight f3, knight f6, bishop b5, pinning my knight. Here I play bishop d7 so that I don't have to compromise my pawn structure. Castles. A6 here, bishop captures c6, bishop captures on c6, rook e1, e6 here, d4 takes, and queen takes. And here I go forwards with d5. Here better would be to simply just play bishop e7, develop my final piece, my final minor piece, and then just simply castle. I'm honestly not too sure why I didn't go for this. At this point it just looks really obvious and it looks like it makes a lot of sense, but I went for d5 instead in the game. Takes, here f5. Trying to damage up my pawn structure here on the king side, since I'm not castled yet. Knight to c7, pawn takes, knight takes. And here queen e5. Here I play bishop captures on f3, g captures on f3, and queen to d6, in order to trade off some of the pressure here. And the reason why I played bishop for knight here is because I realized if I go queen d6 first in this position, which is still an option here, I like this a little bit less because I thought after knight g5 there was some ideas of putting a lot of pressure on my position, like let's say queen captures on e5, rook captures on e5. Then after something like let's say so bishop to c5 check first to get my bishop developed, let's say king h1. Then here I wasn't too sure what to do. Obviously here I can here apparently I can do something like bishop to d4, which I didn't really see. Because I thought after bishop d4 there was some tricks like knight takes on e6, and then here, but bishop captures on e5 covers c7. This was what I was worried about because I thought there was knight c7 check here, and after if I play king d7 then knight takes and rook takes, then this is still better for black because I have the 2 bishops and white is less developed, plus this king is kind of stuck in the corner. But I missed the fact that after bishop captures on e5, c7 is defended. So here I play bishop captures on f3 first. Here bishop captures on f3, and then g captures on f3, queen d6. Here bishop's f5, developing another bishop f4, developing another piece. Queen takes, bishop c5 check, get my bishop out. And then here I play queenside castle in order to get this rook on the open file. Rook d8, rook takes, and rook to d8. Here my opponent plays knight to d5, and here I play f6 to kick away the bishop, and here I play the move knight to d4. The idea with this move is I'm attacking this knight here and I'm forking these 2 pawns. And then here let's say you play knight g7 knight c7 to defend your knight. Then here I have a move like rook to d7, and I can get the 2 minor pieces for the rook, and these 2 minor pieces should be able to beat the singular rook. However, credit to my opponent, which is why there's this high rated, found the best move in this position, which is to play the move c4. This looks like it gives away this pawn on f3, which I ended up taking. However, I miscalculated something, and this is why I actually couldn't take. As you can see here, b4, bishop back to d6. I don't want to allow something like, let's say after bishop a7. This is actually checkmate. As open as my king looks, it actually has no more squares. This rook cuts off d7 and d8. This knight covers c8. And this bishop here lasers down and covers c7 and b8. Which is why I have to play bishop to d6. Here my opponent played knight b6 check, king c7. Rook takes on d6, rook takes on d6, and c5. Here I come back with knight e5. My opponent takes this knight, pawn takes. And here after knight a8 check, I realize that I can't play king b8, thinking that pawn takes and king takes a8, this is equal because after d7, my king is too far away to get back in time to stop this pawn. So I realize I have to sacrifice my piece pretty much, and try to win, or try to draw, sorry, being up 2 pawns versus the knight. And the good thing within this position is that after king c6 takes, that this knight is in the corner. So this knight has to spend a little bit of time trying to dodge my king and getting this knight out in order to help with pushing these pawns forwards. Here, king g2 was played. I played king c6. My idea is to try to play king b5, king a4, and then pick up these pawns. And my secondary idea, or I have 3 ideas with this move. Second idea is maybe b5, and then as you can see, this knight is limited on squares, so king b7, king a8 potentially. And a third idea, which my opponent ended up doing, is baiting the move a4. The idea with baiting the move a4 is that now my king only has to traverse this much to get to these 2 pawns. Whereas in this previous position, if I were to go around, then I have to play 1, 2, 3 to get to capture this pawn, and then 4, 5 to get to this pawn. However, by baiting out the move a4, 1, 2, 3, 4, now I can simply pick up both of these pawns consecutively, and I have to waste less moves. So after a4, I play king d5, now knight b6 check, king d4, king to f2, king to c3, and as you can see, if this pawn was back on a2, then I have to go king b2, king takes, and then come back, at which point my opponent's knight has enough time to jump around and probably take some of these pawns, or something like this to pick up the g7 pawn, etc. And then here takes, king to b4, knight to d7. Here I take this pawn. There's no point in defending e5 because it's going to fall off anyway with king e3 if I play e5, or e4, sorry. And then here I play king to b4. My idea is to get into c3 and then c2 and then see if I can maybe help this pawn advance forwards. Here, king e3, I play king c3, knight d7. Here I play b5, knight f8 to try to pick up this pawn on h7. And white is actually, although it looks like white's knight is really far away, white's knight is actually just in time to pick up this pawn. After b4, knight takes on h7, b3, knight g5, b2, there is knight e4 check, and here I play king c4, and then there's knight d2 check in order to prevent b1 equals queen. Here I come back to c3. My idea is that this knight is kind of stuck because it has to rotate between b2, e2, b2, c3, or b2 and a3. So this king, if it leaves, let's say king f4, then here I can simply play king captures on d2, and I'm threatening b1 equals queen. So the king is currently tied down to defending this knight, and if you play something like knight to b1 check, then here I can play king c2, attack your knight, and pester your knight until it comes back to d2, at which point I can come back to c3, and your king still can't move. Like, you can go to e2, but that's not making any progress. So king c3. Here my opponent plays h5. Here I simply play g6, limit my opponent's pawn from moving forwards any further, because in these types of endgames, sometimes one tempo is all it takes. Here, knight b1 check, king c2, knight a3 check, king b3, knight back to b1. Here I play king to c2, knight back to d2. So now it's my move, so sort of my opponent did a little bit of like triangulation per se to make it now my move. Here I simply play king back to c3. Now we get sort of like the same position as before. Here my opponent plays king e2. And here it's very important I don't continue with king c2 and stay too sort of focused on this one pawn. Because in this type of a situation with my pawn all the way on b2, I know that this one knight, there is no way to outright win this pawn unless my king is around and it can fork my king and my pawn. Because if I move my king, let's say my king is all the way in h8, this knight basically cancels out this pawn. Because if this knight goes to attack the pawn, then they're not controlling the b1 promotion square, so I'm able to promote. And this knight on d2, it can't ever attack this pawn without having to give me the right to promote, because the knight can't control 2 squares right beside each other. Which is why, in essence, these 2 pieces cancel each other out. So in essence, it's basically king and king versus h4 pawn and g6 pawn. And which is why here I find king d4, which is the correct move. The idea is, since I mentioned these 2 cancel each other, I don't have to worry about defending my pawn. The only way my opponent can actually get off the pawn is taking it with the king, at which point I have enough time to walk over and capture the h4 pawn. So here, king d1, I play king e3, and as you can see, here this knight, it has to basically, at this point the knight can obviously move because this king controls the promotion square as well as can capture b2. However, here I'm quick enough that I can capture this pawn without this knight being able to come back and defend, because the only way for the knight to defend this pawn is playing knight f3, at which point I can simply capture the knight, and honestly speaking, I'm probably winning in that scenario. King takes b2, king to g4, and at this point we agree to a draw, seeing as the fact that this pawn's going to fall off and there's no way to win knight versus pawn. The only way to win it potentially is if the pawn is a rook pawn and then my king is on h1 and then my king gets trapped in the corner. So just to illustrate, let's say the only way to potentially win this is in some sort of position like this. Let's say we go to the corner and then my king gets locked in a box. So let's say something like this. F3 check, king here, and then say we just repeat like a couple moves. And then in a scenario like this, after h2, I have to get my knight to g3 somehow in order to deliver a checkmate. So this is the only scenario where I can get to checkmate, but thankfully my pawn, as you can see going back, my pawn was on g6, so there was no such possibility, because it only works on the rook files, because my king is basically stuck and it can't go to any other file besides the g file, but that can be locked by my opponent's king. So so basically after king takes on b2 and king to g4, we agree to a draw in this position, seeing as the fact that I pick up this pawn and my opponent would have to sacrifice the knight for this pawn. So in general, against a really high rated opponent, nearly 2100, pretty good result. A draw is still pretty good. Besides from that, this game, not too many mistakes. Should have castled my king a little bit earlier and played bishop to e7 earlier on in the opening to get my king a little bit more safer. Besides from that, still a pretty good game. And yeah, so I finished the tournament with 2 out of 5. Although that's not a great score, still pretty good for me, considering the average rating for probably all 5 of my opponents was around 2100, and I can score almost half against 2100 is still pretty good. It shows that I have a pretty decent level, considering I haven't played tournaments in quite a while. And yeah, hope you all enjoyed this game, and thanks for watching.